You know how it's almost like there's two sides of you. One that builds and grows and develops and is confident and is capable and wants to work and grow. And one minute, you know, this part of you is existing, you're meditating, you're on self-improvement, you're reading, you're working, you're doing things that you need to do to achieve your goals. But there's another side of you, a part of you that destroys, where it's the polar opposite to the other side, where you're breaking things down, you're going to bed late, you're going to stupid websites that you shouldn't, you're playing video games, you're not exercising, you're not taking care of yourself, and it's bad. There's like an angel and a devil on your shoulder, and 1 week or 1 month, the angel will be on your shoulder, and this part of you will take over, and you'll feel really confident about your ability to achieve your goals, and you'll be working really hard, and you'll be focused, and you'll be locked in, and you'll be saying no to distractions, and you'll just be, you know, you'll be like a monk, disciplined, proper, how you should be. But after a couple of weeks or a month of that, you either burn yourself out or you stop feeling that emotion to grow, and you essentially just start to break yourself down, and you end up in a rut, and you end up angry, and you know, you're eating bad foods, you're not doing things that you should be doing, and you seem to just jump from one extreme to the other. The chances are is that this is happening to you, right? You're going through a cycle, or you know, you're living out a pattern in your life where you go up and you go down, and your behavioral manifestations of your psychology seem to be very unpredictable, and you swear to yourself every time you come out of a rut that will be the last time. You know, you tell yourself, I'm never going to do this again, or I'm never going to go back there. And then miraculously 2 weeks later, after, you know, 2 weeks of confidence, the doubt creeps back in, and you go from feeling extremely confident and happy to extremely doubtful. You're borderline like depressed, you have self-hatred. Well, fortunately enough for you, I've been through this for a long time. And I figured out how to completely solve this and break the cycle. This video will change your life. This is that YouTube video that you've been looking for. The one that you miraculously stumble upon and you watch. And if you finish this and you watch it and you understand it until the end, I'm going to completely blow your mind. And I'm going to completely change your perception on not only yourself and your behavior, but the entire way the world works. And this is genuinely the key and the secret to truly getting what you want out of life and becoming successful and achieving the goals that you want to achieve. And that's not just some dodgy YouTube retention strategy like watch to the end because you're going to get value. This changed my life. This took me from a basically broke, lazy, addicted, useless, apathetic 18-year-old kid who didn't really have much going for him and was just angry at the world and got rejected by girls all the time and just played video games and, just drank and didn't do anything useful for the world, all the way into someone now who is 25 years old and has built an 8-figure business, has his dream life, and is happy and content. And, the difference between those people is night and day. And I can sort of show you, right? This is where I live. If you've been watching my past few videos, like, I'm aware that if you're going to watch someone talk about how to change your life on YouTube, it's nice to know that they've actually got some level of authority. So believe me, I take no pleasure in flexing on you, but this is where I live. I have a beautiful house on the Palm in Dubai. It's a pretty big house. Don't know if you can see this here. Ta-da! But, I moved here a few months ago. I have my dream car. I have my dream watch, which is a $30 Casio. But all jokes aside, I think that blatant displays of wealth are quite pathetic. And I think that, I know that I need to earn your trust through authority. So that's my pathetic attempt at doing that, right? Your argument could be, well, if he's a millionaire and he can afford to live on the Palm, why can't he afford a new hairline? But the truth is that I'm scared of Turkish doctors. But anyway, let's actually get into this. So I've drawn a little diagram for you. And this is going to be a deep, dark, dangerous video. It's going to tell you some truths that are going to open your eyes, and if you're not prepared to go on a journey of discomfort with me, then I would suggest you click away now. This is not for the faint-hearted. This is not a casual self-improvement watch. I'm not going to tell you to, you know, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and go to bed on time and, you know, stop texting girls. This is not, none of that. All of those trite things that you already know to do, like, you know, oh, like fasting and all this. It's not about any of that. It's about something severely deep and terrifying, and I'm going to explain it to you. I don't know how long it's going to take, maybe a couple of hours, so let's hope that I can maintain my train of thought and explain. So we're going to start with the diagnosis, right? What I've done here, I'm actually quite proud of this drawing, because if any of you have watched my videos before, you know that I can't really draw. I know that this doesn't require too much artistic prowess, but you get the point. So you are essentially, as an entrepreneur or anyone trying to achieve anything, you know, if you have a goal and you want to achieve something, if you're not like a normal person, and by that I mean you don't want to go to the 9 to 5, you don't want to have that nuclear family and a mortgage. You want something different. You want to be different. You want to grow. You want to develop. You're terrified of mediocrity and being average. And the thought of settling down, you know, with a job that you're not too sure of for the next 40 years terrifies you, right? And that's fair enough. So if you want to escape that and you want to build a company, you want to grow, well, you are, my friend, at war, right? There is an enemy. There is someone or something that you have to defeat in order to accomplish that which you wish to accomplish, right? And the enemy is you. I kind of explained this earlier. There's two sides to yourself. One, confident, powerful, developing, growing, action-based. The other one, doubtful, weak, lazy, apathetic, angry, doesn't want to work, hates the idea of progress, right? And what happens is you can start to map your behavior and the way in which reality manifests to you on a simple graph. And this is essentially called an oscillation, right? It's a wavelength, but we're just going to call this an oscillation of behavior, okay? And what your life looks like and how your life is currently happening is you basically build yourself up to a peak, right? Where you get to a point here, right? Where you feel pretty good. You know, you spend a couple of weeks or a month or 2 months or even a couple of days, and up here you have loads of positive E. Positive E means positive emotion, right? Here you're proud, you're happy, you're confident, you're on top of the world, you're crushing it, right? And what starts to happen is you sit at this peak for a short period of time, right? Because obviously the main, you know, the thing down the bottom here is time, because our behavior is tracked over, you know, the variable of time. And so, you know, for a short period of time here, you sit in positive emotion. Now, if you could be this person in this state for your entire life, you would achieve your goals easily, right? You know that side of you that knows what to do, and you're working and you're concentrating and you're focused and you remove all distractions. If you could just be that person forever, then you'd have exactly what you wanted. So the question is, well, if you're this person and you start feeling great and happy and proud and you're making progress and you're genuinely moving towards your goal, then why do we have this like cliff? Why does it happen? Well, it's going to get deep. But what happens is you go from feeling great about yourself to feeling terrible about yourself. You know, this here represents growth and building and working and working. And then this here, you just stop working, you actually start destroying. So what you're doing here is you're creating and you're building. And it's almost as if, statistically, you create it just to destroy it. And you come down here to a point where you have negative E, which is negative emotion, right? These are the emotions that don't feel very pleasant. They register neurologically as bad and painful. We have self-hatred, we have anger, we have guilt, we have shame, we have apathy, we have Like just these negative, low frequency emotions that make you feel pretty bad about yourself, right? And this can happen in a very short period of time, as I'm sure you're aware. You can go from being on top of the world, at the tip top of heaven in your mind, to the very depths of hell at which you despise. And this can happen in a day, this can happen in half a day, it can happen over the course of a week. It's usually gradual. You know what it's like where you go and you start working and then suddenly you sort of let one thing slip, like, oh, I'm just not going to go to the gym today because I'm feeling a little tired, or, oh, like, you know, I made 50 cold calls yesterday, so I'll only do 25 today, or I'll let myself off because I've done pretty well coming up to now, and the cracks start to show and your discipline starts to waver, and before you know it, you're here. But what happens is you get to here, and you get to the bottom, and you feel all this negative emotion, and you've built it, and now it's destroyed, you know? But for some reason, by some miracle, all of this negative emotion is channeled back into your work. And so from the ashes, you rise. You get to this point here, you hit a low, and then you start to regulate yourself. You get to this point, and you start to regulate yourself back up. And suddenly, it's about, no, I'm confident, and I am feeling good, and I can be disciplined. And then, you know, a few days goes by, and before you know it, or a few weeks, or a few months, or whatever time horizon that you track your behavior over, then you're back on top of the world. And, you know, all the positive emotions about you're building, you're feeling confident, you're feeling determined, you've got this drive, you've got this motivation, all these positive emotions are pushing you forward, and you do it all over again. You get to the peak, and then suddenly you start slipping, and then bang, a couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of days later, couple of hours, sometimes you're back here and you feel the doubt. And so what's really happening here, right, is we are oscillating, our behavior and like our actual like physical actions are oscillating. But really what we're oscillating between are really two emotional states, I would say, right? The first one is confidence, right? And the second one is doubt. So you seem to be sort of, you know, between these two states where 1 minute you feel like you can do it and what you want to achieve is actually accomplishable and, oh my God, this is actually going to happen, I can see it, you're doing affirmations, whatever. But then the next minute, it's 3 in the morning, you're still awake and you're just sat there crippled with fear and doubt as to whether or not this is going to work, right? So what I'm going to tell you is that this graph, in order for us to break this cycle and like actually surpass this and transcend it, which is entirely possible, by the way, I'm going to tell you how, and your life won't be the same. I cannot over exaggerate like the amount of importance this holds right now in your life if you resonate with this, right? But in order to break this, we first need to understand it, right? So what you might have noticed here is that we have this sort of dotted blue line, right? And you might be asking yourself, well, what does this dotted blue line, you know, represent? Well, this blue line that we have in the middle here represents the average state at which your behavior is manifesting, or the average result that you achieve in your life. It's the average state, effectively, right? And so what I mean by this is if you mapped your behavior over a 90-day, 180-day, 365-day time horizon, we would be able to establish an average, right? So let's start getting actually like, let's get specific on these behaviors, because this graph can exist in so many different forms. This isn't just like a macro explainer of your entire emotional state or behavioral being. This thing manifests everywhere. So this will manifest to the amount of money that you have in your bank account, to how healthy you are, to the state of your office or the state of your the state of your bedroom, to how well you treat your friends, to how extroverted you are, to how introverted you are, like how clean your email inbox is. Like this, you have this everywhere. And essentially what this is it's like an internal thermometer of behavior, right? So in biology, right, in human biology, our bodies are capable of performing something called homeostasis. And homeostasis is essentially, if you're familiar with it, you kind of should be. It's pretty responsible for keeping you alive, but homeostasis is the system in our body that is responsible for temperature regulation and control. And so if we get too cold, then our body will start to do things to warm us up. And if we get too hot, then our body will do things to start cooling us down. So, if you get too cold and you're freezing, then your body will start to shiver and the blood will start to circulate in different ways. I don't know how it works, to be honest with you. And then that will bring your body temperature up. But if you're way too hot, then you'll start to sweat and, things happen to your blood and your organs and stuff like that. And then your body temperature decreases, right? And so it's important for the body to have this thermometer, right? Because, the average body temperature is 37 degrees. And that's the temperature at which enzymes can catalyze substrates, and that's the temperature at which proteins aren't denaturing in the body and stuff. So it's kind of important that the body maintains its average, because newsflash, if you don't, you die. You know how hard your body will fight being too hot with a fever? It's not pleasant, right? And it's because it knows if it doesn't, you're gonna die. So the point here is you can use this to explain ups and downs, right? So too hot, too cold, but it's not physical in the body. This is also psychological. So too confident, too doubtful. Too happy, too sad. What are some other too laid back, too disciplined. Or sorry, too disciplined, too lazy, right? You have this thermostat, essentially, this air conditioning of your emotions, right? And there's a gauge inside of your being or consciousness or psyche that regulates your emotional state and doesn't let you go too far in one direction. And so the first thing to understand about this graph is it serves a purpose of maintenance. It doesn't want you to go to too much of an extreme. And the thing about extremes emotionally is that any behavioral thing or any emotion taken to its extreme will naturally become its opposite. It's paradoxical. So if you think about it, extreme discipline, and I'm talking discipline on a level that's sustained and extreme, all you do is you're super disciplined. Well, extreme discipline will become extreme laziness through burnout, right? And extreme laziness can not always become extreme discipline, but for me it would, because I won't tolerate it, right? So let's get to understanding this. So the first thing you need to know is that you can map this, let's just map this in terms of your finances, right? So I'm actually gonna just remove these bits here because they're gonna get in the way of my diagrams. Okay. Just want this to be nice and clean now. All right. So I think that is a pretty good introduction to this graph. And now let's actually start getting somewhat specific with this thing, okay? So if you track your bank account and how much money you have in your bank at any given time, over time, what you will find is probably an oscillation between a peak and a trough. So for example, when I was 18 years old actually, and building my first business, at my peak financial state, I would have about £10,000 in my bank account, right? And that's what I would save, and that's what I would get to and save. And at my trough, at my very least, my bank account, I would probably have about £4,000. And so this is the first thing to understand about the graph, is you have a natural ceiling that you perceive you do not surpass, and you have a floor that you do not surpass. So this is essentially the lowest standard that you're willing to accept. And I can tell you that most of the leverage you're going to get from this video and how I'm going to help you is we're going to talk about your standards, because that's really the main thing. But the point is that it would be very, very difficult, extremely difficult for me to surpass £10,000 in saving. As soon as I got to, close to 10 grand or got to 11 or 12 grand, I would just look for ways to spend my money. And I would, spend that money, and I'd start to break it down and, spend it and stupidly spend it. And then I get to the point where I've got £4,000 in my account, right? And this was 7 years ago, right? And I would never, ever go below 4,000, never. It was just a rule of thumb. I would rather not eat for 3 days and spend no money on food than go below 4 grand, right? And so I get to this point where I've got 4 grand, and that'll be my panic number, right? So everyone has a panic number, everyone has like a standard that they're not willing to break. And so I would then start regulating it back up to the point where I had 10,000. And if you tracked my average sort of savings, how much money I've got in my bank account at any given time on average over the course of like 180 days, well, you'd obviously find the mean between these, which would be about £7,000. So the thing is here, is in life, it's 7,000 there. Because, if you add 10,000 to 4,000, like if 4,000 is the lowest it goes and 10,000 is the highest it goes, and I regulate between these 2 points, well, the average is, those two together divided by 2 because there's 2 variables, right? So it's about £7,000. And the thing is that in life, it's all about this blue line, right? Achieving what you want or not achieving what you want is seldom about your low point or your high point. It's all about your midpoint, because the average is the thing that matters, right? Because if I looked at my financial state and I was trying to fix it and diagnose it, and I was trying to get to grips with it and to terms with it, then like, I haven't got 10 grand frequently, I haven't got 4 grand frequently, it's just the average of having both of those is you've got 7 grand, right? So this happens financially. This would also happen with other things in my life as well, and I'm sure it does with yours. So, for example, let's take my state of fitness when I was younger, and I was like 18, 19, right? At the peak of my fitness, I'd be going to the gym 5 days a week. I'd be running like 15 kilometers per week, and I'd be like perfect diet. Like, I'm talking not a single gram of sugar or seed oil or anything is getting past my lips. Just perfection, right? Perfect discipline towards my diet and my body. And so what would happen, this would be my peak, and I might be able to sustain that for a couple of weeks or whatever. But naturally after, a couple of weeks of that, like I'd stop training, or like I'd say I'm fatigued, or like I'm burned out, whatever. And then like I'm also craving this stuff and I feel like I should eat it, blah, blah, blah. And so then down here, like there would be 0 days a week, right? Maybe I do like 3 to 5 kilometers, per week. And there's no dieting. I'm eating McDonald's, I'm drinking Coca-Cola, there's absolutely no dieting, right? But once again, it's not about like my severe lack of discipline here, and it's not about my extreme presence of discipline here. It all comes back to the average, right? Because if I'm trying to like bulk or grow, it's not about like doing it for a couple of weeks, it's about doing it for a couple of years, right? And so it's about the sustained average of these 2 things. So what I'm going to encourage you to do now is take a second to get a piece of paper and a pen and draw out an oscillation like this. And I guarantee that you will be able to map out lots of things in your life where this is manifesting, right? Where you go up and you go down and you seem to have this pattern, right? So I want you to go and get some paper, get a pen, and I want you to look at the thing, or look at the things in your life that you know are happening, and then I want you to map them. And I want you to make it like what I just did there with numbers. I want you to make it specific and predictable, right? Because what starts to happen, the first step to fixing this thing is becoming aware of it. And you might say to yourself, oh, I don't have like a panic number. If you're doing the money thing is the easiest because you can actually see it with bank statements and stuff, right? But you might think like, I don't have a panic number, or you do. You have a number that you self-regulate down to, and when you hit that number, you panic. I can give you a prime example, right? So my company, Imperium Acquisition, we are near enough at 8 figures, right? In terms of income, so like 800,000, $1 million a month, sometimes 700, but we're near enough at that point now where we're making $10 million a year. And in December, this is now January 2024, so in December of 2023, I think we did something like 500 grand in cash, right, in revenue. And it's December, so we basically 2 weeks where there's no sales coming in, people are pausing and stuff like that. So it's natural you've only really got like 2 weeks to do it, but it still counts as a month, right? And I remember this because it was only like a couple of weeks ago that we got the financial reports back. We did $500,000, right, give or take, or pounds, maybe like $550. But that made me feel pretty disgusting. And I know that this is going to be extremely difficult to believe. And I know that you're going to think about this as false and a lie. But for me, making $500,000 in 1 month makes me feel physical pain. That genuinely registers in my mind as painful. In the same way that £4,000 going below that would be painful, me going below 600 grand a month in revenue makes me feel I'm beside myself with fear and terror. And I know how ridiculous that sounds, and I know how insane to you that may be, because if you made 500 grand in 1 month, you probably, like, I don't know what you do, probably feel great, right? But what I'm trying to tell you is that this thing, it doesn't go away. This is a universal behavioral phenomenon, and it does not matter what level of success or financial abundance or anything in your life, doesn't matter what you achieve, there will always be a lowest standard and there will always be a highest peak. So for me at the moment in my business, and I can tell you this because this is exactly what happens, right? Because I'm still living this oscillation, but I've just been able to play the game at a significantly higher level, and I've broken it, and I'm going to teach you how to sort of get out of the cycle, but it's still regulated, so you can still become aware of it. You know, I'll go between like, you know, like $1 million a month, right, where I'm making $1 million a month, and then, you know, we'll have like months where maybe we do like, you know, 500 to like 600, right? So my goal right now is figuring out how to get to like 1.5 just consistently and hold that there, and then, you know, but the point here is, you know, if you told me, if 5 years ago, you know, 6, 7 years ago, when I was starting out as an entrepreneur, I was happy if I was making like 3 grand a month. And my panic number was like $1 grand a month. That's when I'm freaking out, right? But if you transcend yourself enough, you will genuinely get to a point where $500,000 a month registers as painful. And so one man's goal can be another man's hygiene standard, right? So what this is down here, essentially is like a hygiene standard. It's a standard, it's something that you do not break or tolerate, or in any way, shape or form, like you just you won't allow it. Like the idea of me going below 500 grand a month, like that's the danger zone. That's tantamount to me eating rotten chicken out of the fridge or not brushing my teeth for 4 days. It's like I have these basic hygiene standards that I don't break because they're disgusting. And I see the 500 grand a month in the same way, right? And in the same way that I see 500K a month, you might see 3 grand a month, or you might see 2,000 in savings. You might see, and this might be, you know, this might be minus 1,000. Maybe you're in debt. Maybe you've got an overdraft of £1,000, and anything below like 1,000, anything above 1,000 in your overdraft, then you start to register that as painful, and you start to panic, and you start to save money and grow and like try and build it up, and then you break it back down. So, you know, this number and these things you can map, they become incredibly predictable. And so what I want you to do now is pause the video for a second here, draw a bunch of these out and track everything. Track your health, track your wealth, track your social life, track how clean you keep your office and your room. I used to have this for how clean my car would be. Like same thing with like my car and petrol. Like I'd fill it up and I'd let it get to just the point where there was almost none left, and I'd go and fill it up, right? It happens everywhere. The big ones that you're trying to solve is probably money, but you can also track this with your emotional state, with how confident you are. So you should be doing that right now. So we can now move on. Okay, so essentially this thing, it exists in a few different stages, as I've mentioned. So stage 1 is, you know, to sort of build. Stage 2 is to, like, this is stage 1, you know, and this is really happening over here, right? And then stage 2 happens up here when you hit the peak and you start to break it down. Stage 3 is like, you know, you sort of hit the trough and then you start to build it up. And then essentially what happens is, you know, we have stage 4 where it happens again, right? Time to get deep. All right. Do I want to rub this off yet? How? Okay, right. So I've got a few notes and a few points. So this video is about to take a sinister turn. I'm going to explain, and it's going to take a while to do this, so you're going to have to bear with me because the answer won't become abundantly clear for maybe an hour, right? I promise it will make sense eventually. I'm going to explain this part to you because the thing is about this cycle is it's not about how high you can go. It's not about everyone in life who's trying to make progress. They focus on the peaks, right? They focus on like how far they can go or how much money they can save or how healthy they can become. But the truth is that the dark truth, and I'm going to explain this all in a second, is the low point. This is the thing that matters. Because think this out of me for a second here, right? If you figure out how to make a ton of money and you figure out how to become a millionaire, but you have a gambling addiction or a spending addiction or whatever, it doesn't matter how much you make, right? In life and business, whether it's money or health or relationships or anything, it doesn't matter what you achieve. It matters what you keep. So when you achieve something, a state or a level of finance, it's the hard work isn't achieving it, it's keeping it, and it's stopping yourself from coming in and destroying the thing that you've built. So maybe you have this with your personal relationships, right? Where you come in, you meet a woman or a man, and you build this relationship, and then like a few months goes by and you just break it all down because you're sabotaging yourself essentially, right? So it's seldom is it ever about how high you can go and how far you can go. It's all about what you do when you're down here, when you're at your worst. Because you can extend this and you can go from maybe right now, maybe right now your limit is 10K, right? $10,000 or £10,000. And you can extend this out to like $1 million, right? But if whatever, you can bring it to like 100 grand or $1 million and save $1 million or 100 grand. But if this part of you is still existing and still wants to just destroy, you're gonna end up with the same result, which is nothing. Or maybe the average increases slightly, but if you don't address what's down here and you just address what's up here, the more this grows in extremity, the more that this thing develops and pushes forward, like the more extreme the high. If you don't address this, the further you have to fall. So it's kind of like if you're climbing a building, the higher you go, the further you are away from the floor. If you want to build your ceiling, you have to bring the floor with you, right? And this is a very profound thing. It won't make sense for a while, but I promise there's a place to go, right? Which I've actually put off making this video for like a couple of months because it requires me to be quite open and emotionally vulnerable with you because I can only explain this through my experience. And we'll get into it. So the point I'm making is like, there's a TV show called The Biggest Loser. It's an American TV show. You may have heard of it. And The Biggest Loser is all about fat people. And I'm going to say fat because they are fat objectively. You can get upset if you want. I don't really care. It's about fat people who lose weight. And the idea of the game show is the person who can lose the most weight in an allotted period of time wins. It's the biggest loser, right? So who can lose the most weight? And what the Biggest Loser do after a year or two of the show is they'll go back and they'll go back to the contestants that won or came second or runners up or something. I haven't watched it in a long time. And what they'll do is they'll reconnect with them. And they'll find out have they, where are they at with their physique and their body and their health. And almost always on The Biggest Loser, they go back a year later and the person has put the weight back on. And so what happens with The Biggest Loser on this TV show is they lose a ton of weight, right? So this might happen with their weight. So maybe like down here at the beginning, maybe like, if we extend this out and we draw it down, right? And this is the peak at the beginning. Maybe, I don't know how much like they would weigh, but let's just say that they're like, 120 kilograms, right? So super overweight if that's not muscle, it's body fat, right? And so maybe like, their lowest trough their floor, they won't go above 120 kilos, right? And then, you know, maybe they lose like a bunch of weight and they get to the point where they're 90 kilos, right? You know, which objectively you could argue is still overweight depending on your BMI. But, you know, they lose all this weight. And then time elapses, but if they haven't addressed the psychological conditioning that is leading to them sabotaging themselves and getting to this point, they're not, it's like you're addressing the symptom, not the cause. Behavior is an effect. Behavior is a symptom of psychology. Psychology is the disease. And the behavior, like if you have a cold, let's say you have a disease, right? And let's say that you have, I don't know, like cancer, right? To just bring a sinister one in. And let's say that you have symptoms of cancer, like you're vomiting, for example. If you go to a doctor and they give you sickness medicine, they are solving the symptom. They are not solving the cause. Because if they don't diagnose you and say that, oh, you've got cancer, let's put radiotherapy or these treatments, etc., etc. Like if a doctor just looks at the symptom, not the cause, they're never going to solve the problem. And so this is why you struggle. Because what you try to do to try and solve this thing is you look at your behavior. You try to solve this problem by regulating your behavior. And so it never works because there's a reason as to why this thing happens, my friend. And I can tell you right now, it is not the Pomodoro technique. It's not no fat. It's not intermittent fasting. It's not the gym. It's not like self-improvement. It's not journaling. It's not meditation. These are behaviors. They are symptoms. They are manifestations of something deep, right? And likewise, you know, all the negative behaviors that you perform that bring you down here, like if you're on The Biggest Loser, sure, you can exercise and you can start to eat better and exercise and do cardio, but you're focusing on the wrong thing. You need to strip this out root and stem, understand why have I got to this point in the first place, because it's not about the behaviors. If you fix the psychology of which the behavior is upstream, then you fix the behavior. You fix your behavior by fixing your mind, because the body performs behavior is commanded by the mind, right? So everyone has this so backwards. If you want to achieve a certain state of reality, you have to achieve a certain character, right? A certain person, a certain type of yourself. And you don't do that through behavior, I can tell you that for free. So let's get a bit into this, shall we? All right, so the way that this, I really don't want to do it. Let's do it. All right. So let me explain to you, I'm going to explain an emotional cycle that exists in life. And then we're going to get into why this thing exists and how you can break it. Because if you can fix the emotional cycle, you can fix the behavioral cycle. And I'm feeling a lot of resistance to doing it, which is why I've put it off for 38 minutes. But let's actually start talking about this. So when we look at this graph, you know, that goes up and down like this, really there are 4 primary emotions, or there are 4 stages or states to the regulation of your emotional state, to regulate your behavior and ultimately regulate your reality. Because what this thing is it's a reality regulator, right? Where you have a ceiling, you know, something that you will not go above, and you have a floor that you will not go below. And between these two, between essentially heaven and hell, like your behavior manifests. And so your body and your mind and your unconscious being doesn't want you to go below a certain point, but it doesn't want you to go above a certain point. Why? Because these are the points at which are familiar and which we are comfortable. And you know the whole like, oh, you don't grow if you're not outside your comfort zone. This is true, but people misunderstand that. This exists because of an evolutionary trait inside of the brain that is engineered towards familiarity, right? Because we know that like if we go, like it doesn't make sense like logically, but if this is 10,000 and this is 4,000, right? The brain knows that we're safe between these 2 stages because we sit between these 2 stages and we're not dying, right? So So that's kind of how this works. Any of these states, like you're evolutionary, you're regulating it. So I'm getting to the point. So the way that your mind or your spirit or your unconscious being regulates your behavior is through emotion, right? Emotion. So the key is in the word here, motion, because emotion is like not emotion, a motion. What is emotion? Well, essentially it's an action, right? It's movement, it's putting something into play, right? And so E basically means like emotion, you get the point. So what are these emotions that regulate our behavior? So really, you can sort of map this out in, like I said, 4 stages. So I've got this over here, because I wrote this out before the start of the video, and I'm going to denote it with a couple of different pens. So this is how it worked for me, and this might be slightly different for you, but I can only share with you here how I broke this cycle and how I came to go from doing nothing to $1 million a month. And this is genuinely how I did it, right? So this is how it goes. Okay. Okay. Here we go. So the way in which my behavior was being, my behavior was being controlled by my emotions, right? And so what would happen if I sort of draw this graph, like if we draw this graph in the middle here, right? You know, we're going up and down, right? So typically the cycle begins for me with anger. And this isn't anger at someone in particular, it's anger at myself. So this is stage 1, which is anger, right? And I'll just put an A. You know, anger exists for me at the very bottom of the trough. This is where I've basically destroyed whatever I've built. I've been lazy, I've been undisciplined, I've been slovenly, maybe I've been gluttonous, I'm sinning, whatever, you know, I'm doing stupid stuff I shouldn't do. And I get angry at myself. Now this emotion for you might not be anger, it could be shame, it could be guilt. There are lots of low level emotions that exist that will push you to sort of fix it, right? And so the anger is usually the place that this cycle begins for me. Obviously it's a cycle, so it's chicken and egg, like where the hell does it begin? Probably like when you're 5, right? But it starts with anger, right? And then what happens is I get so angry at myself and I get so much self-hatred that the anger has to go somewhere, right? So in physics, right, there's this idea that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can merely be converted into another sort of silo of energy, if that makes sense. So you can't create or destroy energy. It transfers between different states. And it's the same thing with emotion, right? With this cycle. It's like what's getting passed here essentially is energy, right? Or emotional energy at least. And the more energy, the more behavior. And so what happens is the anger over here gets transferred into what I call drive. And drive to you can mean a lot of different things. Drive is determination, discipline, focus, motivation. This is basically positive emotion that fuels the hero's myth. So this is like what you could call the hero's emotion. It's when there's something wrong and you need to go and fix it. And it's meaningful and it feels great. Because, you know, you go from being really angry at yourself and then you're like, right, it's time for me to pull myself out of this rut and like I'm gonna, you know, then it's the hero's emotion, essentially, right? And so what happens is at the bottom, I get angry and then this anger quickly turns into drive, right? And the drive happens here, like just as I'm about to start, you know, on this upwards trend. By the way, this isn't the deep thing. We're going to get a level into this, into my emotional state in a second, right? It's going to be difficult. So the drive, the drive brings you up. You know, the hero's emotion, whatever you want to call it, the motivation, the discipline, whatever it is. And at the peak here, this becomes pride, right? because I've mapped this out pretty diligently, right? So I can tell you this becomes pride. So pride is a very simple emotion. It's when you feel good about what you've done, right? It's when you've been disciplined, or you've been doing the right thing, or you've been going to bed on time, you've been working really hard, you've been, you start to feel good about what you've done. It's like a good feeling, like, oh, like I've actually made some progress here and I've saved this money up, blah, blah, blah. And so you start to feel proud because you've manifested your drive and you've escaped the anger, so to speak, right? But what happens pretty quickly is this pride then becomes comfort, right? And the comfort is the thing that sort of destroys it. And then the comfort, after a while, turns into anger. So the way I'm defining comfort here, right, is like, you're all proud of yourself and you feel good, and then you start to like, you lose the drive that made you have all the positive like action. And you start to feel comfortable and you're like, okay, like, I can sort of ease off the gas now, and, now it's time for me to sort of relax a little bit and like, slow it down, and I'll start to like do this, and I'll go to bed a little bit late, and, maybe I'll go and eat the burger, and like, maybe I'll start doing this, or I'll go for a few drinks. Like I'm comfortable now, right? And comfort exists for a fair while, right? But the problem with comfort is it's not like, there's no reason to do the right thing because you just feel good. You just feel comfortable. You're just hooked up to an IV on morphine. You're just like, yeah, this is great. I feel fantastic, right? And so what happens is through comfort, like slowly anger starts to form. It's important to understand that these are not binary emotional states. You don't just wake up one day into comfort and then suddenly you're into anger. Right? We transition between states, right? So like, for example, if energy is being converted or transferred, it's not just like 1 minute it's one form and the next minute it's another. Like, let's say, for example, you turn on a light bulb, right? What will happen is the light energy will be converted into heat energy, right? Over time, as the light sort of gets hot and stuff like that, and it will be converted into heat energy. And then maybe eventually into kinetic energy. But it's not sudden, at least to my basic knowledge of physics, it's not. Maybe it is, maybe I'm completely incorrect here. But the point I'm making is this is a gradual cycle. And you can see it's gradual by the way that these graphs go. They can be exponential emotions. So as soon as you start feeling angry, it can really quickly come on. But it's a transitionary, state of affairs where we go in this cycle. And so what happens after comfort, you stay comfortable for a while, then you start getting a little bit angry at yourself because, suddenly you've done some stupid stuff and blah, blah, blah. And then you get angry again. And then the anger then sits in that for a while, and you're sort of like still doing the stupid stuff, and, you're angry about it because like you're still angry. So you go out and you drink, and then you're even more angry that you drank. And then eventually, like each emotional state has what we call a threshold, right? It's sort of like, a point. If this is a graph and this represents a threshold, I don't know if you can see that up there. Like the emotion will, like, if this is sort of like the intensity, right? The intensity of the emotion, and this over here is time. What will happen is the emotion will start to develop, and then suddenly it will hit a threshold, and then bang, it just like flies way up, right? I don't know if you can see that up there, you can. But the point here is it just goes whoosh, and then your behavior starts to like line up. So it takes a while for your behavior to catch up with the emotional state that you've just entered. But these are the 4 stages of the cycle. Now, we need to get to the bottom of these stages to really understand like what's actually going on here, right? And there's a couple of things that we're going to get into, and then I'm going to get into the deep dark point that I really don't want to, but will help you a lot, because if someone told me this when I was 18, it would have saved me 5 years of immeasurable suffering. So I'm going to do you a favor. But here's where this gets fascinating. And when I figured this bad boy out, I was like, oh, I get it now. Because I've been meditating on this for like years, right? So what this comes down to is the first principle of human behavior, which is pain. Really, at first principle, the reason any human being does anything is to avoid pain, right? Now, you could make the argument that there's other reasons we do things, but the truth is, my friend, if you ask yourself why enough and you Socratically reason your actions through to a length that's probably borderline unhealthy and obsessive, you'll find a deep desire to just avoid pain. And here's the problem. Different emotional states carry different levels of pain. And different levels of pain carry different levels of action. Because in order for us to do something, there has to be a reason, and that reason usually has to be pain, right? So anger. If I am in the state of anger, my pain level is like a 10 out of 10. If I'm at the bottom of and this applies to you as well, I'm assuming, if I'm at the bottom of the rut, and I'm at the trough, the lowest point at which I could be, I am so angry at myself, and I feel so much shame and guilt towards my behaviors that I am in real pain. Right? Genuine, real, psychological, like, suffering. Like, I hate where I am right now. I hate that I've done this to myself. I hate this has happened again. I hate everything, right? And so I'm in a 10 out of 10 pain, right? And then when I get to my drive, right, I'm still in pain, but not as much, right? So when I'm into the drive stage, you know, maybe the pain is like a 6.5 out of 10. Because, like, I'm still in pain, but the thing is certain emotional states act as painkillers for the mind, right? And what this means is that if I'm really angry and then I start feeling motivated, the motivation dulls the pain a little bit. It's like a sedative almost. Because the positive emotions, like, they dumb it down because you're starting to make progress, you're starting to behave to fix it, and that numbs the pain, right? So maybe let's just say we go from a 10 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10. So, you know, when I'm on this sort of, you know, remember what happens here, right? So we've got this, and we've got anger here, and we've got the drive here, and we've got the pride here, and we've got the comfort here, right? And so what starts to happen is I'm in my worst pain, 10 out of 10 here, 7 out of 10 at this point. So I'm still, like, below my average when I'm in my drive period, right? The thing that gets me from here to, like, sort of here, I'm still in pain because I'm still running away from this feeling of anger and shame and guilt and all this suffering, right? So 7 out of 10. And then the thing is when I get near to my peak, I start to feel proud, right? And that's pretty much how it goes. I'm just looking at my whiteboard here. Yeah, essentially, right? So I start to feel proud. I start to feel pretty good about it, right? And when I'm proud, I'd say my pain level is maybe like a 2.5 out of 10. You know, like if you're proud about what you've done, it's kind of difficult to feel pain and pride at the same time. Like, if you've just finished a marathon, your body might be feeling physical pain, but psychologically, like, you're feeling pretty good, right? You're proud of yourself. You're not, like, you did it, right? So I'm not in pain here. And then what happens is when I get around to comfort, which is the thing that comes after pride, this is a 0. There is not a single piece of pain going on in my life. Because what I can start to do is I can justify the down. If I'm proud and then I start to become comfortable, like, I can now start to eat the bad food and spend the money and do the stupid stuff because I feel that I've deserved it, right? I'm not in any pain at this point, and I'm not in any pain because the behaviors that I'm performing feel justified. They feel like I've earned them. I've earned the right to do the bad thing, if that makes sense. And so this is how, like, this is the thing. And so what we can observe is that with the graph is the level of action that you take to improve your life or break the cycle or to start to make progress depends on how much pain you're registering at any given time. And that's essentially how it works. And so what I can tell you, and this is the unfortunate secret, because I actually need to make another note here. I'm just going to make a note over here. And yeah. So what I can tell you is that, like, the secret to constant progress is pain, right? And what you want to try and do here is learn to register your current ceiling as painful. I'm going to explain how to do this, right? There's 3 things that I need to walk you through now. right? The first one is, what have I got there? Well, no, there's two things I need to walk you through. The first thing is a theoretical model that I've developed on how to like break the cycle. And the second thing is the thing that I'm getting to, that you need to understand all this to get to why I'm going to explain it. And that's the bit that I don't really want to get into, because it requires me to be emotionally vulnerable to like 30,000 people. But we'll get there. I'm working to it, I promise, but you need to have context to this thing before, right? So we've got this graph, right? And, you know, we go from up here to down here, and we have an average in the middle, right? And by now, I'm hoping you are, I hope you understand. I've taken an hour here to explain this, and I hope you understand it. You understand that you have a highest point at which you can't seem to break past, and the lowest point at which you won't go below, because we never break our standards, right? We have an average, which is the summation of these two things over a long period of time with enough frequency. And we have 4 emotional states that regulate our behavior and explain why we do what we do, but it's not the only reason. But the way that you break this thing and the way you make progress is you have to basically change your perception of the ceiling, right? Now, we're going to attack this from two pieces. Earlier on, I said it's all about down here. This is where most of your leverage will come from, okay? Because we'll get into it. It's got a lot to do with trauma. I know I'm dropping the word in now, I'm hinting at you. And we'll get into that. But the first thing we can do is we can focus on the ceiling, and I can theorize this out and explain this out to you. So what you want to do, and I in my program, Imperial Master's program, we have some mindset training that explains this. And I explain this in there in some more detail, but what we want to do is something that I call flipping the floor, right? So we have the floor here, which is a state at which we will never ever go below. It's a hygiene standard, we just ain't going below it, right? And we have the ceiling here that we seem to struggle to, you know, break through. We bang our head every time we try, and we regulate back down. What you want to do, and I'm going to explain this in a simple format, is you want to register the emotional state that you would usually register at this point here. This is the secret, theoretically, and I've been able to do this. This is how you break this cycle, right? Is all of the emotions that you feel here, all of that negative energy and all that pain that comes when you hit your lowest point, you need to channel and continue to feel when you hit your ceiling. Because what we can know now is that this is all about pain. And what we're trying to do here is we are trying to enter an endless loop of this stage here. You know, this stage here where we're in the up. This is what we're trying to cultivate as much as humanly possible, right? Is we're just trying to stay on this upward trend. And we will always be on this upward trend for as long as we feel true, genuine pain. The second that that pain is numbed, and the second that that pain is gone, is the second that you will stop working and you will stop making progress towards your goals. And so what we want to try to do is when you regulate up and you start to achieve your goal and you get to your ceiling, is you want to start perceiving that ceiling, and you want to start believing that the peak that you usually achieve is actually disgusting. It's the worst possible thing that could ever happen to you. Let's say right now you want to make $10,000 a month. You, my friend, need to reframe your relationship with that goal. You need to look at 10 grand a month and imagine that makes you, it's disgusting. To just break 10 grand a month is just like horrible. And that's so hard to do because you've pedestaled it, right? You see it as the be-all, end-all achievement, and that would solve all your problems in your life. But I can tell you right now that if you achieve 10 grand a month and you celebrate 10 grand a month, and 10 grand a month makes you feel happy and proud and good, then you'll never ever, like, that becomes your ceiling. What you celebrate and what you register as emotionally nice, and whatever up here numbs the pain, is what will become your standard. is that's what will become your limit. The true root of limit is celebration. Okay? If you're playing this game to feel good, stop. Okay? If you're getting into business because you want your life to be happy and you want to be content and comfortable, do not go into business. Because once you enter this realm, I can tell you right now that it is a trap. It is a psychological trap that only a select few people have the heart to play consistently. It's not about feeling good. It's not about going and sitting on a beach. Maybe that's what you think right now. Maybe you think you want to make 10 grand a month so that you can have financial freedom. You're going to get here, man, and you're going to enter this pain. And if you're playing this game to feel good, just stop. It's not about feeling good. It's not about happiness. It's not about being content or comfortable. It's all about constantly breaking yourself through this cycle over and over and over again. And maybe you don't believe me, but I guarantee you in a year or two of entrepreneurial progress, you'll realize exactly the same thing. You'll get to 10 grand a month, if it means a lot to you, and you'll get to 10 grand a month and you will feel the exact same way now. You know, all that pain, all that suffering, all that doubt, all that, you know, you'll feel it when you make 10 grand a month. Because, you know, what will happen is, what is your floor right now? Like, you know, you'll break it and you'll get 10K a month or whatever, but then the 10K a month will become the new floor and you will start to register negative emotion at 10 grand a month and it won't feel good anymore. It's a trap. You're not going to escape it. It's great. I love it. I love playing this game. It's like I said earlier, 500 grand a month makes me feel sick to my stomach. And I know I know you won't believe it, and I know that you won't, I know that that's not feasible, and I know that that just sounds ridiculous, but I genuinely feel true psychological horror and pain at 500 grand a month. If I made $10,000 in 1 month, I don't know what I would do. That would make me, like, this is the thing about standards, is you can't even, it's the same thing as if I said to you, like, imagine if you, like, went down the street and you saw an old granny and you just beat her up, you just beat this old woman up for no reason. Like, you trying to comprehend yourself doing that, you can't even imagine it. It's so unfathomable and it's so, like, out of your remit and conscious understanding of the way the world works, you can't even comprehend it. Like, if I made $10,000 in 1 month, I reckon that would make me ill. I reckon I genuinely would be terrified. Like, pure, unfiltered horror. And so you need to start to learn how to do this at this. You want to be in constant pain. This is a cynical way to explain the entrepreneurial journey. But do you think for a minute that any of the super successful entrepreneurs that you look up to are always happy and feel great about themselves? No. Like, don't get me wrong. I am in a place in my life right now where I am content and proud and happy, right? And you can have, like, a good life and you can have good things in your life, and you know, because business it's not all about business, right? But my point here is, it's not like, I don't want you to think that if you start a business, you're going to be depressed forever. That's not how it works. But my point here is, like, there always needs to be an element of pain if you want to make progress. Pain is petrol, right? And without petrol, the car's not going to go anywhere. So most people in their businesses, they're building businesses to try and escape pain. I want pain. And I don't think you quite understand. I derive pleasure from being in pain now. And I don't mean that in some weird sexual masochistic sense. What I mean by that is, like, I am comfortable when I'm uncomfortable. And I feel happy when I'm in pain, you know? So when I'm making progress in my business and I'm in the pocket and I'm suffering and I'm having to do this work and, you know, I love it. Like, it brings me true joy and meaning. So I'm talking about this as if it's a bad thing, but for me, I love it because it's what I'm familiar with now. You know, it's kind of like if I'm running and I'm doing like a 15, 20K and, you know, I'm running and it's horrible and I'm not enjoying it, but I love that feeling. Like, I get genuine joy from it, you know. And you might doubt yourself as to whether or not you can do the same, but I promise if you do it for long enough, like, what becomes familiar becomes, like, you know, what becomes what we're happy with, right? If you don't believe me, someone explained Stockholm Syndrome to me, right? Where someone can get kidnapped, be in an awful lot of suffering, and then they fall in love with their kidnapper. It's kind of like, that's kind of how it works. This is like the kidnapper, right? You'll fall in love with it. You'll love it. So further to this point, where you are, you're basically, the easiest way to explain this is you have a dream and you have a standard, right? You have something that you want and you have this peak, this ideal heaven-like state, and you have this terrible hell-like state that you'll never break and go below, right? The easiest way for you to achieve your goals or to achieve your dreams is make them the lowest standards that you are willing to accept. We do not become the highest version of ourselves of which we can imagine, we become the lowest version of ourselves that we can accept. That's a Sam Ovens quote for you. We do not become the highest version of ourselves that we can imagine, we become the lowest version of ourselves we can accept. It's all about the standard, right? Now, I've got one more thing to explain that we're going to get into the deep thing. But it's all about like taking the goal and making it the standard that you so wish you didn't have. Like, I know it sounds weird, man, but you need to start looking at 10 grand a month and being like, God, if I made anything less than 10 grand in 1 month, I'd be on the edge of a bridge, right? Rhetorically, I'm not telling you to kill yourself because you're not making 10 grand a month. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. It's a point, right? I'm not using suicide to make a point. I'm just explaining you need to start looking at your goal as an outcome that makes you feel very uncomfortable and very unhappy. Because if you register your goal as emotionally painful, when you achieve it, you will want to escape it. And that will force you and push you even further away from the goal towards something better. So, for example, like, for me right now, I'm in a state where if I'm not clocking $1 million in 1 month consistently, I register that as true emotional, genuine pain. And I've hit that number a couple of times, but I'm not at the point where it's consistent. I'm like a couple of $100 grand off here and there sometimes, right? And so I'm right now in psychological pain because I'm not at the point at which I want to be, right? And even then, when I get to $1 million a month, it's still going to make me feel uncomfortable because I've been able to associate my dream and my goal with pain. And it's such a hard thing to do. And it's such a weird thing for me to tell you to do because it doesn't seem to make sense. You're like, well, 10 grand a month would fix my life and change my entire life. And you're telling me that I should be unhappy with that? Yes. Because if you're going through this cycle where you suddenly you make 4 grand a month, then you come down here and make 1 grand a month, then you regulate back up to 3 and then back down to 500, then back to 4, then back to 1. If you're going through this cycle, it's simply because you're not in enough pain. And so you need to create pain by looking at your goal and telling yourself that that is not a good outcome. You might then ask, well, that's paradoxical because then why am I going to try and move towards something that I feel pain towards? That's not the point. The point is that you need to tell yourself that if you're not at your goal, you feel sick. And it's like your goal is, like, instead of your goal being up here, it needs to be here. Because this will really push you forward, right? So I hope that makes sense. You might have to sort of watch this, a fair few times here. But essentially this is like flipping the floor, right? You have the diagram, the ups and the downs, you have the low and you have the high. And the way that you make progress is not by trying to increase your high, but by trying to increase your low. Because remember we have this dotted average across the middle, it's all about increasing the average. How do we increase the average? Well, we know that just increasing the high in the long term won't increase the average. Because if we increase the high without addressing the low, the further we extend the high, right? So if you imagine for a second here, the further we extend the high, up, all the way up here, 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 like blah, blah, blah. The further this goes, right? The further we have to fall back down to the original low. So you can't just set higher goals and expect yourself to achieve them. You have to set higher standards and not accept anything below that, right? So if you want to raise your average, if you want to make progress in life and business, it's all about what you're willing to accept, not what you're willing to try and achieve. And so if you're trying to look at your goal right now, and you need to start perceiving that as a hygiene standard. Not achieving that and not having that makes you feel sick and uncomfortable. Instead of making you feel good having achieved it, it makes you feel bad having achieved it. It's like it's the lowest point. It makes you feel angry. So if you're making, like, I'm going to stop this point in a second because I know I keep repeating myself, but it needs to make sense to you before I get into the deep stuff. If you want to make 10K a month, stop imagining that 10K a month is going to make you feel happy, and start to imagine that anything below that, even just making 10 grand a month, is like that's the lowest you'll accept. And you need to meditate on this for a while. Right. So now I'm going to explain. Do you remember earlier how I talked about cancer and I talked about symptoms and we talked about cause and effect, and how, like, if you had cancer and you went to a doctor and the cancer was making you vomit, and you went to the doctor and the doctor just prescribed you anti-sickness medicine, and you stopped throwing up, but you know the cancer is going to continue to grow because they haven't addressed the cause. What I've spent doing in the last hour and 10 minutes is I've been addressing the symptoms, right? And I've been telling you how to fix these symptoms, right? Although with the exception of the last 10 minutes, but we've gone into the sort of symptoms of understanding. Now I'm going to address the cause. And this is something that I have never talked about on YouTube. It's something that I've only really discussed with very close friends and family. It's gonna take me, you're gonna have to bear with me here, because to unwrap this, there's a lot of personal emotion and suffering tied to this for me. And I am near enough certain that you will resonate with it and that it will in some way, shape or form help you understand yourself better and help you understand this cycle. Forgive me if my emotions get the better of me and I start to, like right now, it's gonna be, yeah, we're just gonna get into it. And the reason I'm gonna get into it is because I just wish that someone had told me this or had the balls to be honest with me when I was starting out, because it makes so much sense. And right, I'm gonna get into it, and whatever happens, happens. Okay, so as we said, there are two types of person. So, okay. This circle represents you, right? This is your identity. Inside of this circle, you have two versions of yourself. This is simplified Jungian psychology. The reality is you might actually have 20, 30 different parts of yourself operating, right? But to keep this simple and straightforward, there's two versions of you, right? So let's actually address these. So you have part one and you have part two. Okay, right then. So part one is the version of you that builds stuff up. Part two is the version that breaks stuff down. We don't need to worry too much about part one, because part one exists and part one gives us progress and this, that, and the other. The part that we need to address and fix is the part of ourselves that decides that we want to break ourselves down, and it's the part of ourselves that undoes the progress. Why does this part exist? Why does our behavior manifest in a negative way? I'm going to explain it. It's going to take me a while, because it's a very dark and difficult psychological concept to unpack. Like I said, it's wrapped in a lot of emotion, so this is how this goes. So how do I break into this? How do I break into this? Okay, let's do it. So we have negative behavior. And a lot of people would call this negative behavior self-sabotage. Right? And the truth is that you're not really sabotaging yourself. That doesn't make any sense, because you're like, I don't get that. But the truth is that the reason that you have this self-sabotage is because there's a part of you that wants to destroy yourself. Right? There's a part of you that doesn't want you to make progress, doesn't want you to grow, and this all comes back to trauma. Right? This is how I learned this, and this is the thing that did it for me. Right? So I'm going to explain to you how I explain to myself. This is what has worked for me. I'm not necessarily pinning this on you or saying this is you. I'm just going to tell you my thing, and that might resonate with you, and that might help you understand. Like, I actually have got, like, for the first time in this YouTube channel, I have got a psychological block to explaining this to you. Like, I'm struggling I'm usually pretty capable of, as you might have noticed, of articulating my thoughts and getting into topics and just drilling to the point and getting, but there's literally part of my mind that doesn't want to do this, so it's blocking it off, but I'm going to get into it. Right. So, when I was 12 years old, this is trauma, by the way. When I was 12 years old, I was bullied. Pretty pretty hardcore bullying. When I was, 11, 12, first couple of years of secondary school, 11, 12, 13, for about 2 years, I was pretty viciously bullied. And I didn't really have any friends. I didn't really have much support, and I didn't really have anyone to help me, with the exception of my parents, but obviously it's in school, right? And every lunchtime, I would take my lunchbox and I would sit in a toilet stool, or I would go to the staff room where the teachers worked, and I would sit outside there, because those are the two places where I felt safest, because no one could come and pick on me, right? And, you know, there were a group of guys in the school who persistently picked on me physically, emotionally. Sometimes they'd pretend to be my friend, and then it was a horrible couple of years. And I had a bad time. I don't know if you can hear the doorbell, but I'm not going to answer it. Someone else can get it. And this is essentially trauma, right? And what this did to me is, for between the ages of 14 to really 18, 4 or 5 years of my life, I went in on myself. I didn't really have many friends. I never really had a girlfriend. I played video games all day. I ate junk food, and I didn't really exhibit any sort of healthy behaviors or progress, or like, it was pretty unhappy time. And when I got to 18 years old, I essentially wanted to start to build a business, right? And this was like a psychological phenomenon, right? You have to understand that if you want to create a company, you're weird. And I don't mean this in like a negative way, but you have to think about this. The psychological conditions that are underpinning your drive for unique, weird, abnormal progress you're different, right? If you've just spent an hour and 60 minutes watching a video on how to regulate your behavior through emotion on a graph with some weird dude with a dodgy beard, like, this is weird, right? You're not acting in a normal way. You're not acting like 99% of people on the planet, right? And, you know, so I was 18 years old, and I began to start this business. And what would happen after, you know, a few months of progress in the business is I would come in, and as I said, I would just break it down and destroy it. And I essentially would start making progress, and after a while I would just taper off and like break it down. This all came back to what happened to me when I was younger. There is a Freudian quote that says that the adult is developed to protect the child. Most people mistake this, thinking that it means that, like, when you're an adult, you're developed to protect children, you know, like your kids or whatever. But that's not true. You grow up to become someone to protect who you were as a child. And what I was doing with my business was protecting myself. Because, is that doorbell still ringing? It doesn't matter. So I was protecting myself with my business, right? Where, like, I was so afraid of being bullied, and I was so afraid of having someone exert or exercise tyrannical control or power over my body or my mind, that I didn't want to have a boss, right? I didn't want to have someone tell me what to do. And so I used the business, like, you know, unconsciously, like, a part of me knew that if I had a company and a business and I worked for myself, that I wouldn't be under someone's thumb and no one would ever be able to bully me again. And so this is why I started my business. Now, I would invite you to explore your past to understand what's happened. Because if you want a company and if you want to do something that's different to everybody else, it's likely that something happened to you that hasn't happened to everybody else, right? There's always a cause and effect to this. And you might not have been bullied, you might not have been through some trauma, but if you want to pursue an abnormal life, you've got to have an abnormal state of psychology, right? And there's always something that starts with the conception of this. So what you have to understand is that maybe you've been through some bad stuff in your life. Maybe you've had an abusive parent or a terrible relationship. Maybe you were bullied. Maybe your parents broke up when you were a kid. Maybe someone died. Like, the chances are, if you're a young adult or you've grown into like a young man, you've probably been through some bad stuff, right? Something has happened to you. And what happens when you're young? And this is the other thing as well, by the way, like most people don't even remember their trauma. Like some of the stuff that happened to them when they were like 5, 6, 7, even younger than that, you just haven't got the memory to comprehend it, right? But what happens when you go through trauma is your mind and your body, the thing that you're dealing with is so painful that your mind and your body essentially just go in on themselves, and we don't deal with the thing. We don't process it. We don't deal with it. We just bury it deep into our psyche. And what starts to happen is if you've been traumatized or something bad has happened to you, and this can just be as much as like, you know, you could be 5 years old and you could drive past a car crash and see like a dead body. And you might not even remember that, right? So don't think that it's something as obvious as being bullied. And I'm not trying to gaslight you into you thinking you've got something wrong with you. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But when we go through trauma, we bury it and we push it down. And so what happens here, and I'm gonna explain, I'm doing well so far with this. It's not pleasant, but imagine that your brain is kind of like a box, right? And if, like, you know, this is me here at 12 years old, right? I'm 12 at this point, right? And I am, you know, being bullied. These arrows, they represent trauma and they represent bad things happening to me and a pretty bad, you know, state of affairs, right? When I'm at the age of 12, what I started to do to deal with this trauma is I started to become apathetic, and I started to just go in on myself, and like I just stopped feeling things at this point. You know, I stopped getting angry, I stopped getting sad. Like after a while, whenever I used to think about it when I was like gaming when I was like 14, 15, I just wouldn't feel anything towards this, right? And so what happens when you have trauma is this box here represents your psyche, right? And so what happens is your brain takes the trauma, and you know, if this is the trauma here, right? It takes the thing that's happened to you and it basically just buries it, right? It buries it in a deep, dark corner of your mind because it simply doesn't want to deal with it. And the thing is it buries the trauma, but it also buries the person that you were when you were experiencing the trauma. So what starts to happen in your mind, in your brain, is like this part of you still exists because you didn't deal with it, you didn't process it. So unconsciously, you're still living the trauma. And what starts to happen is you develop this sort of part of your psyche, and this part of your psyche is going to try to communicate with you. I know that this is so weird, and this is like I'm not doing a good enough job of properly explaining this, but I'm going to keep going until you get the point. Think of it like this. Imagine that you are up to your waist in a swimming pool, right? And imagine that there's someone here, and this person, they throw a beach ball at you, right? They throw a beach ball at you. You're up to your waist in a swimming pool, right? What happens is they throw the beach ball at you, and you know the beach ball is ugly and you don't want to deal with it. It's like, it's not a nice beach ball. You just don't want to look at it. It's annoying. It makes you feel horrible. So what you do is you take one of your arms and you catch the beach ball, and you just push the beach ball, you know, under the water, right? And this is trauma, right? I'm going to explain. And then what happens is, you know, 5 years goes by, you know, another 5 years goes by, and then, you know, someone else, like this point, maybe you're like, you know, 15 years old, the first beach ball you buried when you were 10, and now you're 15. And another person comes along and like they throw another beach ball at you. You know, and once again, you don't want to deal with it. It's not a nice beach ball. It's really horrible to deal with. Like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, you know, I don't like it, right? And this represents a traumatic event, right? So what you do is you catch the beach ball with one hand, and you use your other hand, and then maybe you cram the beach ball like between your legs, and then you still got like one hand, you know, above the pool, but you're sat on one beach ball, you've got one hand on another, and you're kneeling together to try and keep this other one down. And then, you know, then maybe another, like, you know, this is when you're 15, for example, right? And then maybe like another few years elapses and now you're 20, right? And then, you know, 5 more years go by. It doesn't have to be 5 years, it could be 3 days, right? But you get the point. someone comes along and they throw another beach ball at you, right? And then you catch it again and you push it down. And then what happens is now you've basically got these 3 beach balls buried. And if someone comes along now and they throw another beach ball at you, well, now you can't catch it. So now if someone throws a beach ball and you go to catch it, suddenly all the trauma comes up. And this is how a midlife crisis happens. So you know when people get to like 40, 50 years old and something bad happens to them and they just break? Like even someone who can be so calm and they seem to have their stuff together, and then suddenly they just, out of nowhere, they just snap and break. This is what happens if you push stuff down and you bury things like this. Eventually they're going to start bubbling up and they're kind of like little volcanoes in your mind. Suddenly you're going to start to behave in a way that you can't really explain because you're feeling emotions that you don't even know why you're feeling them, but it's all coming from this place of trauma, right? So, another example here could be like, let's say that you grew up and let's say that you grew up with your mother, right? And you didn't know your father, but that wasn't traumatic because you hadn't registered it, right? But let's say that your mother was always super strict with money. And she always was so like, never wanted to spend money, super tight, never wants to spend any money, doesn't want to go anywhere, doesn't want to do anything. And over the course of a few years of living with your mother, you start to develop this like complex because you want money and you want to sort of deal with it. So when you go on to start your business, it might be because you've got this deep part of yourself that you buried that has always seen this scarcity and this like lack of money. And so like, that's why you start your business. It doesn't have to be some big traumatic event, some big painful thing, but there's almost always a psychological reason as to why your behavior is manifesting, right? So I'm hoping that this is starting to make sense. I'm aware that it's weird and it's out there, and I still feel like I'm not hitting the nail on the head here. But what basically happened is when I was 12, right, I had all this bad stuff. This is 12-year-old me. And when I was being bullied, I didn't want to deal with this or process it. I didn't really talk to anyone. I didn't talk to a therapist. I very rarely told my parents about it. I just dealt with this on my own. And usually I just buried myself away in video games and junk food so that I didn't have to think about this or deal with it, right? And so what happened is I pushed this thing down into my head, into my mind. And here's the thing. When you go through something and you don't process it and you don't seek to understand it and you forget about it, but it's still in your mind, this thing exists in your unconscious. And Jung came up with a quote that defines this perfectly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. So until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And so what started to happen, remember what we talked about earlier with self-sabotage and this diagram, sort of the slope off into the trough, Like the reason that I would self-sabotage was because in my unconscious, I was still convinced that I was being bullied. Now this is going to get weird and deep. I've done hours of shadow work, therapy, thought into this, but I truly get it now and I can explain it. So I buried this, I buried this 12-year-old kid into my psyche, and I never chose to deal with his experiences, right? I never made the decision to process and understand up until a couple of years ago. And so what this kid basically thought, this version of me, it was living this cycle. So unconsciously, it was still believing that it was being bullied because like it's in the unconscious. And so what would happen, and this is where the point's about to make sense, I hope, is I would build myself up to a certain point, right? And I would make progress. I don't know if you can see that, I don't think you can. I would build myself up to a certain point, and I would make progress, and I would start to, develop. But then some part of me would come in and obviously destroy it and bring it down to a trough. And the person that was responsible for doing this was my traumatized self. Because it is impossible for you to behave out of alignment with what a part of you believes it wants or believes it should have. And so if I'm making this progress, say, in my business, right, and I get to a point where I'm nearly like independent and now I'm my own boss, well, if there's a part of me unconsciously convinced that it's still being bullied, to behave out of alignment with that belief doesn't make any sense. So I would like build myself up, and then this part of me would come in and destroy it down because it's like, well, hang on a minute. we're still being bullied. Like, you're just a victim. You're not worthwhile. You haven't got any friends. You're lonely, you're miserable, you're sad, you're vulnerable, you're weak. Like, if I'm behaving in a way that is out of alignment with the beliefs of this kid, it's impossible. So I build myself up and I'd start to believe that I'm strong and independent and like now I've got friends and stuff. But over time, this thing would just come in and be like, that's not how I see the world. So in your mind, in your psyche, you have, your psyche sort of can be broken up into lots of different segments, right? Lots of different, pieces of the puzzle here. So, this part here might represent a desire for social interaction. This part here might represent a desire to be on your own. This part here might represent, the idea of you being bullied, and this part here might represent you making money. We are constantly at war with ourselves with these parts. And like, let's say, for example, that you've been invited to a party, and initially you accept the invitation, and this part of you is getting what it wants. It's getting this social interaction, the extroverted energy, and it's starting to, go out and see people. But then you get close to the party and you start to feel like, I kind of don't really want to go to that party anymore, so I'm just going to ignore them and not go. Or maybe you start to date someone, and at the beginning you are totally in love and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then time goes by and you're sort of like, I'm not so sure, no thank you. And so whenever there's like something in your life where you've got two competing parts of yourself, this is an indication that in your psyche and your unconscious, there are two things that are trying to get different things from life, if that makes sense. And this is Jungian psychology. This is some deep, dark psychological stuff, and it goes into a lot of stuff. Say, for example, there is a woman who is outwardly extroverted, right? But when she was a kid, when she was 5 years old, she was playing in like a sandbox with some other girls, and the popular girl befriended her, and then the popular girl completely embarrassed her in front of all of her friends, right? If this woman wants to grow up and develop as an adult, to be a healthy, integrated adult, she needs to remember that, or at least recognize the emotions that come with it and process it. Because if this woman now starts going to try and socialize, she might start making friends with people, but as soon as she starts making friends with people that are popular, she's going to naturally ease off, and she won't know why, but basically what's happening is her unconscious, like the deep part of herself that's just trying to avoid that same thing that happened, is just basically going to manifest and happen again, if that makes sense. So like, what my point is here is that when we talk about like the angel and the devil, the two different parts inside of your psyche, you essentially have like different versions of yourself, different pieces of your unconscious mind that are going to fight to compete to get different things. And so if you have extreme oscillations, it's a sign that you're at war, and there's two parts of you that want different things. So the question then becomes, well, how do we deal with this? Because this is the symptom, right? Sorry, the graph is the symptom, but the cause is the two different parts of yourself that want different things. So the way this works, and the way that I basically had to do this, is like, I had this 12-year-old kid in my unconscious mind, and because I hadn't processed the bullying and processed the stuff, this kid was still convinced that I was being bullied, right? This part of me was still convinced that I'm a victim, that I'm lonely, that I'm sad, that I'm angry, that all of this stuff, right? And so what would sometimes happen in my life is like, I would start to make progress, like, I'd start to make friends and I'd start to build a company. But then this part of me at the bottom of my psyche would recognize that and be like, well, that's out of alignment with the way that I see the world, so I'm going to bring in what I want, which is like, destruction and pain. Because if part of you is convinced that all there is destruction and pain, if you start trying to build non-destruction and non-pain in your life, this part of you is always going to come and break it down. Because it's just like, you can't behave out, if you've got all these different psychological parts, you can't just behave with one's interest in mind, because all the other ones are going to be unhappy and they're going to come and get you. So how do you fix this? Like, if there's this part, if trauma's there, or if you've got, for whatever reason, you've developed like a neurosis, or there's a part of your psychology that just doesn't want to succeed and win, how the hell do you deal with it? Well, you need to perform something called integration, right? And this is entirely possible to do. But you need to integrate your psyches together, and they need to start to see eye to eye and stuff like that. So how did I integrate this part of myself, this, this bullied 12-year-old kid that would always come and destroy the stuff I was doing, right? Because as soon as I can tell you, the second that I did this was the second that I took off in my business. And this is not even a joke. I went from doing like 30 grand a month to like 200 grand a month this was like 2 years ago now, the second that I performed this. So here's what I did. I had a therapist, and well, she wasn't actually a therapist, she helped me with something called shadow work, which is what we're trying to do here, right? And what basically happened is we talked about me being bullied, and she suggested that what I do is I go back to that psychological place. And so I sat down after this session and I started listening to a song called Amber by Flume, right? It's one of my favorite songs. It sounds a bit weird at the beginning, but there's these notes halfway through that are just gorgeous. Like, what you want to do, and I'm not telling you to do this because you might not be psychologically ready, chances are you're rejecting this information, by the way, because the part of you that doesn't want to be dealt with is like going to reject this, but this is how I did it. I sat down and I listened to Amber by Flume, and I shut my eyes and I actually imagined, I took myself back. It was like suddenly I was just snapped into suddenly I was in the shoes of myself at 12 years old again, right? And I took myself back and I remembered the school, and it was very vivid. It was like a dream almost. And I just sat there and re-visualized being bullied. That I remember the memories, I've repressed them, I've forgotten them. I was convinced that I hadn't even been bullied and it wasn't a big deal at all, just a couple of kids that picked on me. But I sat there and I replayed the memories that unconsciously I've been continuing to play that I wasn't conscious of. And I played them through, and it was horrible. I remember, like, you know, in school, I had this memory, came back real fast, and I was next to this place called Practical Block, which is where we used to do all of our science and, like, you know, practical science, right? And I was on the sort of walkway, and Practical Block was on my right, and these kids were coming the other way, and I just played it out, and I remember it, and it was so visual. Like, you know, being pushed around and like abused and just horrible shit, right? And then I went to sitting in the toilet eating my lunch. But like, what I would do is I'd pick my feet up and put my feet on the toilet, so that nobody knew I was in there. So like, if people came in, they wouldn't recognize my shoes, you know, and then they'd know I was in there. So like, and I remember it, and I remember eating like jam sandwiches, like white bread, and just very, 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 very vivid, horrible imaginations, memories that I hadn't processed. And so what I was doing is I was processing this trauma. And, you know, then what I did is I took myself into the third person, and I visualized it happening again at third person. Then I put myself in the second person and visualized the bullies bullying me from their perspective. And I did this for about 10 minutes, right? I had Amber, I think Cornfield Chase by Hans Zimmer, like songs that made me feel emotional and brought these emotions back. And then 10 minutes of this, it was almost like it was vivid. It was like so extreme, right? I didn't know how much time had passed. Sorry, yeah, it's pretty hard. Sorry. And I did that. And then I opened my eyes. And I remember just a complete wave of, I don't know what emotion overcame me. And I cried a little bit, right? I cried a little bit, just sort of sobbing, like, you know. And I went downstairs, and my girlfriend at the time, I'm not with her anymore, my girlfriend at the time was sat on the sofa downstairs, the couch as you call it in America. And she was very nurturing. She was great, right? And she'd seen that I'd sort of been crying, and she was like, "Are you okay? You know, you're all right." And you know when you're sad and someone asks if you're okay and you're really not, and then you know. And I cried on her for about 45 minutes, and I'm not talking like little sobbing. I'm talking like full on bawling, like full on tears flooding down my face, like whole body like like shaking, like genuine like pain leaving my body. And it felt amazing. It was obviously unpleasant, but I cried and I didn't stop, and I just didn't know when I was going to stop. But this was essentially integration. And I said to my girlfriend at the time, I won't name her name, as I was crying, I said to her, "I'm so proud of myself." I said, "I don't have to worry anymore. I'm not being bullied. I'm not like that kid, that part of me, like, he's good. Like I've shown him, like I opened my eyes and I looked around and I saw my desk and I saw my house and I saw like my life, and I realized that I wasn't under the thumb of trauma anymore. Like I opened my eyes and I was like, I've done it. Like I'm not, like I've built the business, I've got the control, I'm not being bullied, I'm free. And I remember I was crying on her shoulder, and like, you know, I was saying, like, I was talking about how through my tears, like how like I don't have to worry anymore and I don't have to destroy myself, and like I'm not a victim and I am in control. And sorry, I'm getting got a little bit caught up in this. But how beautiful is that? You know, like how incredible that you can be downtrodden and destroyed malevolently by other people, and you can go through horrible experiences, and you can really be put through the ringer. Sorry, and come out and use that as energy to do something and to fix that. And so what I realized in that moment, God, crying out loud, man. Sorry about this, guys. But what I realized in that moment is that my business up until that point had been all about protecting the child that was like in my unconscious. I was working to protect myself. And the second that I realized this, and it was like a switch in my mind, the second that I took myself to the darkness and the pain and processed it and dealt with it, was the second that I was now unencumbered by that child. And I no longer, like, it was almost like I went down into the cave of my unconscious. I picked up this poor 12-year-old kid that I just hadn't dealt with, or like I hadn't even like acknowledged him, you know. Like the argument is that when there's like emotions are often or sometimes unconscious parts of you that can't communicate. And so if you've got like a part of you that's been buried away, like when trauma happens, it's like when something bad happens to you when you're younger, you don't want to deal with it. And what happens is like, it's like your body and your mind take a screenshot of your current psychological state, like a GIF almost, and they bury that GIF under your unconscious. And that continues to replay over and over again, and it will dictate your life if you're not aware of it. And so it was like, I went down into my unconscious through processing this, and it was almost as if I'd gone to this 12-year-old kid who was crying and sat eating lunch on his own, being bullied. And it was like I picked him up, you know, fireman's lift, or I just picked him up, and I brought him to the light. I brought him to the unconscious, and I said to him, he opened his eyes, and I said to him, I got you. We're good. You're not being bullied anymore. You're not a victim. I'm sorry that I've neglected you for the best part of 10 years, because I didn't do this until I was like, well, 23 really, 22. So 10 years. Most people don't do this in their entire lifetime, right? But it was like I picked him up, take him to the light, opened the door of my conscience, and said, look at what you've done. Like, you're good, man. There's no more, you don't have to worry about being bullied. I've got you. I've sorted it out, you're fine. This is called integration. Integration is when you take a deep part of your unconscious, like a part of you that is fighting against your conscious efforts, because if you achieve your conscious efforts, you are now out of alignment with that part. So it's impossible for me, if I've got a 12-year-old version of myself inside of my unconscious that is convinced that it's being bullied and a victim, for me to manifest a reality that is out of alignment with that is near enough impossible, because part of me is convinced I can't do it. So this is where limiting beliefs come from. This is where negative behavior comes from. And I'm still not perfect. I still break things down. I still have destructive behaviors and tendencies. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, I'm not like a monk. I'm not a beacon or paragon of discipline. No one is. All the people that you look at online, all of the gurus, all of the self-help people, we all struggle with this. It's just that we're a little bit further along than you are, right, in terms of our ability to do this. And so back to my crying, right? I just realized, like, suddenly in that moment that I was free. Because up until that point, I truly, genuinely had been building my business to protect myself. And so my business was serving the purpose of protection, and like the adult was developed to protect the child, right? So I was doing this to protect this version. And as soon as I brought this 12-year-old version of myself to the light, opened his eyes, gave him a hug, and said, I got you, we're good. You know, that's integration, that's processing trauma. And when you do that, it's almost like you unlock this superpower. Because now my work and my, everything that I'm doing through my business is no longer to protect a child. So I am unencumbered by this trauma. I can now just work and focus, and there's lots of stuff I've got to work through. There's tons of manifestations of behavior and emotions that I still want to dig into. I haven't been there since because it was so psychologically taxing and so painful that I don't want to go back to do it. I'm going to do it in probably soon. But since then, I haven't done much shadow work or therapy or anything because of how dangerous, well, not dangerous. You need to know what you're doing. You need to do it with someone that's good. But that was what happened, man. And so that sort of, it comes full circle to the graph. It comes back to this, this graph. Like, remember the symptom and the cause thing? Like, what's the real cause of me destroying everything that I built? Well, it's just having part of me that's, sorry about that, I think the cleaners are cleaning up. Why do I destroy this? It's because, I've got part of me that is just convinced that, like, I can't do it. Like, it's like, I'm still convinced I'm being bullied, right? So that's how I fix this. And what I'm gonna do, I'm going to take you on a quick excursion through my house to show you some books that might help you understand this in a bit more. So I've got them upstairs. There's cleaners about, so I'm going to have to be careful there. Hang on. All right, there's no one in here. So right, I'm in my room. So the person that really sort of oh, by the way, you can see the view, it's kind of cool. I don't know if you guys have seen the Palm before, but this is the Palm Tower. You can see out there. It's pretty cool, Anyway, so the person that founded the whole idea of the unconscious and stuff was Carl Jung. And so I spent quite a lot of time studying Carl Jung, and it's helped me make quite a lot of progress, in my life. So just a few books that you could read to help you gauge this and understand this better. The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung is a good book. I haven't read all of these through and through because they're quite dark. It's painful. But his point in The Undiscovered Self is the whole idea that you haven't discovered this part of yourself, blah, blah, blah. Psychology and the Unconscious is a good one. Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self by Carl Jung, once again, dark. Psychology and Alchemy, another one. I haven't read all these all the way through, by the way. You could quiz me on them, but I might not be able to answer. But that, and then the Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. So, I've kind of summarized to you. Actually, I think there's more. I think I've got a couple more, but have I? No, not in Dubai. Wait, let me just walk downstairs a second. I can't do two things at once, it'll go wrong. It's cleaners. All right. God, I feel like a vlogger. It's embarrassing. Yeah, this is the living room, by the way. If you can see that, it's kind of cool. So yeah, I mean, you can start reading into Jung if you want to. If you want to get started with this, all you have to do, it really is just go on YouTube. If you go on YouTube and you start searching shadow work, because shadow work is basically the practical solution to the integration of the unconscious parts of you that are fighting against you. And if there's a symptom, there's a cause. So if you have this up and down, and you sabotage yourself, and you are going through this cycle, there's a reason for it, right? And that reason is that there's an unconscious part of you, there's a piece of your psyche that is actively battling and fighting your progress. Because for you to consciously make that progress, you're misaligned with some deep part of your psychology, right? You don't have to sacrifice the goal, you just have to understand the part of yourself that's fighting against you. And then you can integrate it and you can understand it and you can listen to its needs and wants. And then you can devise practical solutions psychologically and metaphorically and spiritually to make sure that when you do achieve your goals, it's in alignment with the part of you that's battling you. Because whether you like it or not, you've got parts of yourself that are going to fight you. And if you want to beat them, you can't beat them. It's impossible. You have to understand them and integrate them. And one example of that is me with that bullying thing. So yeah, so it's quite a dark thing, and like, you know, I'm surprised I managed to do this without getting all like super sad or emotional. But that's how I did it. That's how I broke this cycle. You know, it still exists somewhere, sometimes in my life. Like, it's not perfect. Like, you know, I'll still go through like peaks and troughs. But ever since I did that, my business, like I said, was less about like protecting myself. And now, and this is not even a joke, this is not an exaggeration. The day after I processed all of that trauma and I dealt with that thing, the day after I did that, I came up with my vision for my company. So it was almost like I'd removed this psychological blockade, and suddenly I was now able to see, like, my company was able to serve more than just me. Because if you're traumatized and if you've got parts of yourself that you haven't dealt with, the chances are is you're working for yourself. But as soon as you integrate all the parts of yourself properly, then the company becomes something even bigger. And that was being the secret. And ever since I did that, ever since I integrated that part of myself, this has been far less of a problem. It still exists in certain ways. Like, sometimes I'll overwork myself and then I have to take like time off and burn out and stuff. But it's nowhere near as extreme, or it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be when I was sort of like, you know, in the first like 4 years of business. I managed to get like 100 grand a month whilst doing this. So you can still scale with this, but if you remove this, like if you remove the downside, you know, if you remove this ability to self-sabotage, and if you just basically shorten the length of sabotage like this, it's way less painful to work. And really what your success and progress will look like what's going to happen here is you're going to go up and down, but over time, you're going to trend upwards. And this is what your progress will look like. Your progress won't just be like this. It will be an oscillation, and you know, you'll be able to draw averages and lines. And what will happen to someone that's growing over time is, you know, remember we had that, if you remember, we had the blue dotted line, right, like this. All you're trying to do is have your, no thank you man, I'm good. All you're trying to do is basically just have the blue dotted line going upwards. And that's all you're trying to do to be successful. Is you're bouncing between this, and what you're going to recognize here is, like, obviously your ceiling is getting higher over time, but as your ceiling is getting higher, so is your floor. So this is what I was saying earlier. You can't just try to, you know, achieve progress and growth by having bigger goals. You achieve progress and success essentially by increasing your standards. So it's seldom is it about getting more standards, it's always about this. And what you'll notice here is, like, you know, right here is, you know, let's just draw this out, and then we'll probably finish the video, because it's almost been 2 hours. So right here is maybe where you're starting, and this is your current ceiling, right? But if you do, and you know, if you do this properly, over some time, as you make progress, is, you know, if we track this here, if we keep going here, what we're going to find is that, like, here now, when we're here, over time, our first ceiling has now become our floor. Does that make sense? Right? So another example, like, you know, if this is your ceiling, you know, if you're making progress and you're not fighting yourself because you've integrated yourself properly, and you're going up and down, what's going to happen is, you know, if we keep tracking this along, now your ceiling has now become your new floor. So I'm hoping this makes sense. This is how you make progress. Is you have a current ceiling and you have a current floor, and you regulate yourself between those. But what you want to try and do is integrate all of your psyche properly, so you're not battling yourself. You're still going to go up and down, but with less, you know, intensity. And all you're trying to do is just raise your standards. And if you do that often enough, and you continue to raise your standards and not accept anything less than, you know, what you really want, then your goal will become, like, what was your goal and what you really wanted is now what you will never accept. My goal used to be 500 grand a month. Like my goal used to be everything I ever wanted and more was 500 grand a month. Now, if I make 500 grand in 1 month, I don't feel happy, I feel terrified, right? It makes me nervous and genuinely I'm beside myself with fear. So that's what's happening. We're making this progress. And I'll leave you with this in closing. It's all about pain. It's all about being able to manufacture pain and like build, like, and I'm not talking like, you don't want to hurt yourself and like, you know, self-harm and stuff like that, because business is kind of just a form of self-harm if you think about it. But it's productive self-harm, right? But it's all about pain. It's all about, you know, not when you get to the ceiling and when you get to this top point, don't celebrate. Don't get too ahead of yourself. Remember the cycle. We go from anger to drive to pride to comfort. When you get like, I'm not saying you should stay angry or shameful or guilty all the time, but when you get to the point where you feel the drive and you start to feel proud and you start to feel comfortable, just become aware of it and double down and bring, like for me now, if I start to feel comfortable, I start to register anger as a response to feeling comfortable, because I don't want to feel comfortable. I don't want to get to the point where I am just like deeply comfortable, because I know that as soon as my comfort goes up, my pain level goes down and my desire to work and make progress is sacrificed. You can't really have comfort and work at the same time. It just doesn't work. So you need to be able to regulate your emotions. But like I said, it all comes back to the root principle. The emotion, like if you ask yourself, what is an emotion? It's a part of you trying to communicate. So this is why if you get to the bottom here, you start to get angry, because there's a part in your psychology that wants to grow and wants to make progress and wants to flourish and succeed. It's a beautiful thing inside of your head, right? Inside of your unconscious. So any time that you get below a standard, that part of you brings up the emotion of anger, or it brings up the emotion of shame, or it brings up the emotion of guilt. Same thing if you have a girlfriend and you cheat on your girlfriend. And maybe you do that, maybe afterwards you feel terrible about it. That's a psychological part of you that like is basically telling you this is a bad thing. It's like the way that your psyche and the different parts of it, you know, remember we've got this psyche here and we've got different segments of our brain or psychology, you know, and the only way that these parts of, the only real way that these parts of us can get what they want and communicate their needs and manifest themselves through the actions of the body is through emotion. So this is why I'm really skeptical of my emotions, because anytime, like if I wake up one morning and I suddenly start feeling like a certain way, I'm like, okay, this is a part of me telling me that it wants something. And then I'll start to explore it. And emotions are sort of like the catalyst for self-understanding. They're like threads of psychological understanding that you can pull on. And really becoming successful is all about just lining up all these parts of yourself with your goal. So this is the thing about a great goal, is a great goal will basically satisfy all of these parts. And then that way, when you need to do the work and start making progress and stuff, like if all of these parts are aligned with the goal, you're not going to be fighting against anything. Because you remember at the beginning I had like war written on the thing? The reason it's war is total war. If you're not integrated and your psyche isn't aligned towards your goal, like if half of your parts want the goal and half of them don't, well of course you're going to be in ups and downs, because they need to, these things, they all need to get what they want. And so if one of these things is a 12-year-old kid that is convinced that it's being bullied and is a victim, and it's given up and it's admitted defeat, right? Which is basically what happened to me when I was like 12. I'd admitted defeat. I was like, great, I'm useless. I have no control over my life and I'm a victim. And that was what it believed. And so this part of me, every time I would try and make progress against those beliefs or those unconscious understandings of, you know, myself, I had no choice but to break them down, because unconsciously that was what part of me wanted to do. And so, no thank you, man, I'm good. No thank you, it's all good, thank you. Sorry, the cleaner's coming, but I had to, obviously, not today. So that's how this works. That's how, God, what a video. No, I hope this has helped you. And if I knew this, like it took me what? So I started my entrepreneurial journey when I was 18, 17 really, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. It took me like maybe 5-6 years of this and suffering to figure this out. Most people go through life and they never get to the bottom of this. This video, I'm hoping this will change your life. This should set you off on a trajectory that is so severe and so great that you're never going to look back. Because as soon as I learn this and as soon as I acknowledge this, this is like the key, the big secret to progress. You no longer need to worry about self-improvement. It's just like, oh, okay, well, the reason that I need to improve myself is because there's another part of myself that wants to destroy myself. And until you address that, self-improvement will do nothing. Like all your behaviors towards your goal and towards your progress, they don't mean anything against the wake of your unconscious. So if you want to fix it, just fix your unconscious. And by fix, I mean integrate. Because you have a goal for a reason, right? There's a part of you that wants to make progress and succeed, and you want to manifest your potential and bring yourself forward and raise the bar of the universe and expand and grow and develop, and that's great, but you're fighting yourself. And if you don't learn the enemy, like it's like Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, like if you understand yourself but not the enemy, you will win half the wars. If you don't understand yourself but you understand the enemy, you'll win half the wars. But if you understand yourself and you understand your enemy, you'll win every war. So the point is you're up against yourself, and the enemy is obviously yourself as well, so it doesn't quite apply. But that's it. I'm at the point in the video now where I'm supposed to sell you something, but honestly, it doesn't really feel appropriate. So I'm not going to do that. There's like a link in the description, but I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I just feel like I made this video for you. I don't care if I book no appointments from this. Quite frankly, I couldn't care less, because even if one person watches this and like they get to speed up the process that I went through, like I wouldn't wish this on anyone. So thanks for watching. I hope I haven't scarred you too much, but that's that. If you made it to the end, by the way, well done. It's a feat. It's like 2 hours long. If you've got like any video ideas you want me to make, just put them in the comments, and then the ones that get the most likes, I'll like make them, because this was a highly requested video. Like loads of people were like, how do you break the cycle? Have a good day. I love you. Goodbye.